שלום לכולם, ערב טוב, ברוכים הבאים. שמי מוטי שוורץ, אני שמח מאוד לפתוח את הערב לכבודו של בכיר סופרנו עמוס וספרו הבשורה על פי יהודה, ולכבוד המתרגמים שלו שבאו והתכנסו מרחבי העולם. שלום לגברת נחמה ריבלין, שלום לרות חשין יושב ראש משכנות, שלום למשפחתו של עמוס ושלום לאורחינו המכובדים חתני פרס ישראל הפרופסור רות גביזון ומר סטף ורטהיימר, ושלום לשגריר אלבניה ולקונסול הכללי. שלום לכולם, וברשותכם אעבור לאנגלית. שלום to our distinguished guests, Ambassador of Albania, Ambassador Dr. Barthul Tsanai, and the General Consul, Consul Altion Verleni. This exciting program, which hosts an extraordinary encounter between an author and several of his translators, goes above and beyond meeting our expectations. The different languages we hear at the meetings are like music that we hear to our ears. We also host local translators for professional discussions. The participants addresses issues of literature, culture, life, contemporary conflicts, and questions that cannot be avoided. Our stage is open, as always, to all voices, and we must remember that the discussion here comes out of literature and culture. Mishkenot Sha'ananim is the only institution of its kind in Israel, and we are once again realizing the original purpose for which this wonderful complex was established, to hold programs that host writers and artists who will come to be inspired and to write and create here in Jerusalem. I would like to thank Mifal HaPais and the Minister of Culture for their support for the program, and I hope that we will be able to continue it in the coming years. I would also like to express my gratitude to the Jerusalem Foundation and the Dangur Education Fund, Professor Evan Fallenberg, the Artistic Director of the program, Dr. Polina Stemler, and the whole Mishkenot team for the production of this evening program, the dear translators who have joined us here, and of course, thanks again to Amos Oz for his book and the wonderful writing he has been sharing with us for many, many years. The translators and musicians will be presented by Professor Fallenberg, who coordinates the program of literary translation and literary writing of the Department of English Literature at Bar-Ilan University and is active in institutions around the world, author and translator, and especially our good friend here in Mishkenot, who is now in his second year of working with us on this program and who takes part in many of our other programs. Ladies and gentlemen, Evan Fallenberg.
Good evening. Let people get settled. Hi, good evening. It's wonderful to have you all here, a packed house. This is thrilling. People coming out for literature and translation. Nothing could make me personally happier. I wanted to explain, really right at the beginning of the evening, what this is all about, why we're here, not just you people this evening, but what the rest of us are doing here this week. A translation residency is kind of a thing that we're creating, and other people are creating different versions of it, I think, around the world. But the impetus for me came from something I read a number of years ago, in which Günter Grass, I learned, when his book, The Tin Drum, was being reissued after 25 years and retranslated in many languages, he asked his publishers to bring all of his translators together in Germany for a week, where they could walk around the city of Gdansk, Danzig in his day, and they could talk to him, and he could talk to them, and he could tell them all the things that he wanted to impart that you can't always put into a book. And over the course of that week, they worked together, and out of that week together came a protocol of 3,500 discrete items of translation, which basically would serve any other translator translating that work as a guide to the translation, but also in a more general sense would serve as a guide for translators of anything, anywhere, literary translation. And this idea fascinated me. The essay I read was written by his English retranslator. And luckily, these wonderful partners here at Mishkenot were more than willing to give it a try. And we tried it last year. We rearranged things a little bit this year. Some of you may have been here for an event we did last year. We're experimenting and still learning what works better, what works less well. And we've had such an amazing partner this year in Amos Oz and in his magnificent book, Judas, which we'll talk a lot more about as the evening goes on. The book is being translated, or has already been translated, into 31 languages. We couldn't invite all 31 translators here. And of course, remember that part of the idea of this kind of an event is that it's the translators who are working on the translation so that they can go back and keep working and make their translations better. And it's literally impossible to coordinate that all the translators of a book will be at the same place while they're translating the book. So what we did was we brought together a group of 6 translators. 3 of them have finished their work on the book. 3 of them are still working. And we're sort of exploiting the ones who finished their work, but I'd like to think that they're also getting something out of it. And the others are learning and learning and learning, as we all are. I think, and I know I include Amos in this statement as well, we're all learning all the time from this process. The other thing that was important to us was to try and involve local translators, emerging translators. And we have 3 who are part of the residency and are here with us tonight as well. They won't be taking the stage, but I'll just mention that these are 3 young women who I hope to see translating more and more over the years. One translates from Hebrew into English, the other 2 translate into Russian and Ukrainian and into Chinese. So, and they, of course, are able to work with our guest translators and learn from them. It's all very exciting for us. And I see the program as dividing into 3 parts. One is the nitty-gritty work of translation, where we sit in a session and we talk about either issues that came up in the book or sentence by sentence. This afternoon and yesterday, we went sentence by sentence through a couple of key chapters and Amos read in Hebrew, I read Nicolas Delange's beautiful translation in English, and then we discussed, well, what happens in Albanian? How can you render this? And is there a word for machatzelet in Turkish? And how do you deal with these things? Part of the time, we even spent looking at photographs. We looked at probably 50 photographs of, in English, it's called a paraffin heater, tanur neft. And Amos picked one. He chose one. He said, that's the one that I'm talking about. And then, you know, the Chinese translator can figure out what that is in Chinese, etc. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is enrichment. I always say that a translator has to know everything about everything, because we encounter literally everything in the books that we translate. So how do you know everything about everything? You don't. Nobody does. And so we do our best. And that means research. But it means all kinds of enrichment. And because this is a book that takes place in a very particular place and time, and with enormous historical references, we thought it was a good idea to bring Ilan Bar David, the director of the literary archives at Ben Gurion University, who is in charge of, among others, the Oz archive. He's coming to talk to us tomorrow. We're meeting with Amitai Mendelssohn, the senior curator and head of the Department of Israeli Art at the Israel Museum, about the figure of Jesus in Israeli art. And Adam Rovner from the University of Denver on Judas in Israeli literature. I can't tell you that there's something particular that will come out of any of those meetings, but I can tell you that the translators will be enriched, and I hope it will actually help their translations. And one other thing that we added to the enrichment part was we hired a husband and wife guiding team. She guides in Hebrew and he guides in English. And they composed or curated a tour of Jerusalem, particularly around Judas. And we took it in English the other day, the translators and Moti and I, and it was an amazing experience. And I know Jerusalem a little bit, and still for me it was eye-opening to walk where Atalia and Shmuel took their walks and be able to see what they were seeing, sort of, as Jerusalem's changed a little bit since 1959. But still, it was hugely helpful. And that was another part of the enrichment program. And then the last aspect of what we do here together is more the behind the scenes of what translators say to one another about translation, about creative writing, about the craft of our profession. And that we're saving for the end when Amos and his wife Neely, who has been with us for every minute and it's wonderful, when they're not with us anymore at the end of the week, and we're going to do those, translation huddles by ourselves. So, by the way, if any of you are interested in that tour, I don't know if it's full. It was being offered in Hebrew, I think, tomorrow. So if you're still interested, you can look into it. And again, I really recommend it. I know you want to hear Amos and the translators, and we are going to get to them. But to set the mood a little bit, we have a wonderful musical duo, Shaul Besser and Gal Yachai. And they are going to come up now and perform some music for you. Over the course of the evening, they're going to perform 4 songs. All of them are taken from Amos's book, The Same Sea, the texts. The music is all composed by Shaul. And I believe you chose, together with Amos, the lyrics. What would be used?
What, today?
No, the songs for the lyrics for the different songs.
Not really.
Oh, well. I like to be misinformed. But they all can be found on your album that came out in 2009 called Hayam Lakach, Hayam Natan. Shaul Besser and Gal Yachai.
השמיים כהים וריקים, איזה עד גולש דרך עד, גשם לא ירד הלילה, כנראה שכבר לא ירד, אפור ושקט כאן מחשיך, ציפור קפואה למות שני ברושים צומחים כמעט יחד, עוד ברוש צומח לחום, הייתי רוצה לדעת מניין בריח עשן, שום דבר הרי לא בוער פה, שארית עפיפון ישן, תקועה על חודי הגדר וער, גולש דרך ער, אני כבר מזמן לא שם, אך עודני רק שם עומדת. השמיים כהים וריקים, איזה עד גולש דרך עד, גשם לא ירד הערב, כנראה שכבר לא ירד, אפור ושקט כאן מחשיך, ציפור קפואה למות, שני ברושים צומחים כמעט יחד, עוד ברוש צומח לחוד, הייתי רוצה לדעת מניין בריח עשן, שום דבר הרי לא בוער פה, שארית עפיפון ישן, תקועה על חודי הגדר ועד גולש דרך עד, אני כבר מזמן לא שם, אך עודני רק שם עומדת, הייתי רוצה לדעת מניין בריח עשן, שום דבר הרי לא בוער פה, שארית עפיפון ישן, תקועה חודי הגדר ועד גולש דרך עד, אני כבר מזמן לא שם, אך עודני רק שם עומד.
Thank you, Shaul. Thank you, Galia. Amos, come join me, please. Amos Oz.
ערב טוב, shalom לכולם, good evening. And before everything, I want to thank my wonderful translators. What an orchestra, and what a conductor, Evan, what a conductor, and what a concert. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll tell you how easy he made it on us in a minute. But first, you know, sort of the man who needs no introduction here needs a little bit of introducing, especially in the context of this particular evening. So Amos has been in the public eye for 5 decades, leading writer of his generation and winner of some of the biggest prizes on offer in Israel and France and Germany and Spain and other countries. And in terms of translation, it's interesting for us, he's written some 30 books, 2/3 fiction, 1/3 nonfiction, children's books, short stories, articles, and these works have been published in 46 different languages. and even a selection from the Chinese translation by our Chinese translator here this evening, whom you'll meet in just a couple of minutes, from A Tale of Love and Darkness, was the first work of modern Hebrew literature to appear in an official Chinese textbook. So that's just a little curiosity for you. The book itself, I know that many of you have read it. For those of you who haven't, it's, well, as you put it earlier this week, it's about 3 characters and a number of ghosts. And it takes place in Jerusalem in the winter of 1959. Shmuel Ash is a young Bible scholar. He's kind of adrift in his life, and he's leaving academia, and he goes to be the caretaker of a cantankerous and very intelligent old man named Gershom Wald. And in the house with the 2 of them lives also Gershom's daughter-in-law, widowed daughter-in-law, Atalia Brabanel. And she is the daughter of a very interesting, not real Zionist character whom Amos invented. I emphasize that because it comes up a lot, also with the translators. And in the course of his untangling all the secrets of the house, Shmuel also stumbles on some very interesting aspects of the Jewish-Arab conflict and about ancient Jerusalem itself, Christianity and Judaism, and the figure of Judas. So it's a love story, it's a coming-of-age novel, it's an allegory perhaps for the state of Israel, and for the biblical tale it draws its title from. And definitely there's a lot to do with treason and the nature of treason. And we'll talk surely partly about the book this evening, but really since we're here as a celebration of the translation and the process, that's where we're going to focus. So what I wanted to tell you about Amos being a great sport about this, I have to say he surprised me to no end when he showed up the first morning with a packet of readings for the translators and for me, supplementary material. And I was peeking over his shoulder at his notes, and he'd made copious notes about the things that he thought would be important, the things he wanted to say. And it would have been the easiest thing in the world for him to just show up here, and we could have grilled him, talked to him, asked him questions, but he really prepared himself with no prompting. And I can't tell you how much, I'm telling you and I'm telling them, how much that's added to our time together. And I think also a part of the aspect of what we're talking about this evening is you're going to be meeting his translators into 6 languages, but that's about the books. There are also translations into other media, like opera and theater and music and film, and we have a nice little surprise for you about that as we move along this evening. So Amos, where does this come from, your remarkable relationship with translation and translators?
Well, you know, I think translation, literary translation, is probably the most underestimated art in the world. Earlier you used the word craft, and I wanted to protest. It's not a craft. It cannot be done by a machine. Translating is rewriting. You and I have borrowed a musical equations this evening, concert. To me, translating a work of literature is more or less like playing a violin concerto on the piano. You can do this very successfully on one strict condition. Never, never ask the piano to produce the sounds of the violin. It will be grotesque. This is the reason why I have always said to my translators, including people who translate me into languages I shall never be able to read, I say, for God's sake, be unfaithful in order to be loyal. And I think the art is an art of finding an equivalent. I don't want my words, word for word, to travel from Hebrew to Chinese or Lithuanian or Portuguese. I want to evoke in the reader a similar smile, or a tear, or bewilderment, or excitement, or a sense of identification. And if in order to evoke exactly the same thing, you need to tell a different joke altogether, tell the reader a similar joke, an equivalent joke, rather than add a little footnote explaining what's funny about the joke in the original. So it's not a thing I would say to my wife, be unfaithful in order to be loyal. But I have always encouraged every one of my translators to reinvent dialogues, descriptions, not whole episodes, but the choice of words.
Okay, that is a translator's dream. That's exactly the kind of writer we like to work with. Somebody who says, do what you need to do.
Ellen, a translator's dream is to work with a dead author.
Well, that's some translator's dream, I'll admit it. I'm not one of them, but yes, that is some translator's dream. But that's exactly, it is the dream because you give the two things that we need the most. One is that freedom, but also the backbone. You're standing behind your translators and saying, I am here for you. I am ready to answer your questions. And that also, especially with a writer of Amos's stature who has so many translators, it's very rare around the world to find somebody who's so willing to be that person, to be both of those people for a translator. Do you recall the first time a work of yours was translated?
Yes, the elderman of the tribe, of the family, Nicholas Delange, who introduced himself to me in Oxford 50 years ago, or just about close to 50 years ago, and in the most surreal way surprised me with the translation of a long short story or a novella called Unto Death, without even telling me that he knew Hebrew. And since then, he and I have had a complicated but monogamous relationship about translation, and I am normally monogamous with most of my translators, few exceptions. Nicholas sat in Hulda. Later on he came to visit us in Kibbutz Hulda and stayed with us, and we actually discussed every single word in translating by Michael. And I will never forget 2 o'clock in the morning. The whole kibbutz is fast asleep. Nicholas and I despair entirely about a remotest chance of conveying a fairly simple Hebrew expression into English, and deciding together to send a telegram, think when it was telegrams, to the publisher in London and New York, Michael untranslatable, how about the Bible?
Well, you were off to a very good start. You said it was complicated, too. Can you tell us a little bit about the complicated side of it?
Well, you know, a good translator insists on a certain autonomy, especially as it happens between me and Nicholas, as I pretend to know his language. My Chinese translator or my Albanian or my Turkish translator, they don't have that difficulty with me. I think I know English. Nicholas doesn't always agree. Very often he disagrees with me. So at some points, he insists that a certain English word or idiom carries exactly what I want. And I say, no, I can't accept it. That's not the way I hear this English expression. And as often happens in married life, we end up compromising, each one of us trying to bend the other in his direction, compromising.
So you gave an example, and I think it's absolutely true that you're hard on him, but then you can be really nice to all the rest of them because English is the only language you feel competent to be able to delve into your translations. And you said that once Nicholas gave you 4 options for a word or a phrase, and you said none of them. Go find something else. And I have to say, I sympathized with him at that particular moment.
To be more precise, he came up with 4 different alternative idioms. I was not entirely happy with any of those. Finally, he asked me, perhaps with a slightly sardonic smile, so what is the English for this? And I returned a smile and I said, English is your department, sir, not mine.
Right. So, You were, until 3 minutes ago, you were the really nice author that we all want to work with.
You made me too nice, so I had to present the nasty
Exactly.
side of collaboration.
Good, fair enough, fair enough.
It's not a garden of roses.
No, it isn't. It isn't, because it's such an imperfect art. If in the perfect world, we'd all read in all languages. And so, you know, we do our best. Have you ever engaged in translation of any kind?
Very long time ago, I tried to translate a poem by a very unknown American, relatively unknown American poet, and never managed to publish it. But I wasn't, in fact, involved in a process which was a combination of translation and creation, when I helped my daughter, Professor Fania Oz-Salzberger, in writing the non-fiction book Jews and Words, which was written initially in English. And I was a supporting troupe.
Okay. And was that good for you? Do you maybe think about developing another career?
Well, I would not dare to step in your flower bed.
That was very elegant. The scope of your work in translation is vast. You've written 30 plus books, but that grows exponentially when all of these books are translated into other languages. So do you have shelves at home with My Michael in Swedish and A Tale of Love and Darkness in Swahili? I see the family nodding.
Yes, I do. You know, I'm a son of a librarian and a pedantic man, and a son-in-law of a librarian, and a brother-in-law of a librarian, and a husband of an archivist. So imagine me not having a neatly arranged rows and rows of translations of my books. They just sit there. I don't look at them very often, but it's nice to go by.
I can imagine just all those Amos Oz in your house all the time. That's fantastic.
They're in the corridor, not in the living room.
Oh, okay. You referred to your monogamous relationships with your translators, and it is really quite remarkable. There's a bit of a competition here among the translators when they were introducing themselves on the first morning. I've translated 8 of Amos's books. So I've translated 12. They weren't saying it like that. I'm ramping it up. But it was very interesting. I hadn't realized that. That some of your translators, I knew about Nicolas Delange in English, who's been translating you, as you said, for pretty much 5 decades. But in many languages, how does that happen? How does, other than the fact that you don't bother them, I understand that. But how is it that you maintain this kind of a relationship with these translators?
You know, I need to write a trilogy if I want to give an answer to this question. Each one of my translators involves a very different story. Viktor Radutsky, my Russian and Ukrainian translator, who is an electronic engineer by train and background, and an officer in the former officer in the Soviet Navy. He fell in love with the Hebrew language and then with the Hebrew literature. He came to me, he introduced himself, he said, well, I couldn't check his work, I couldn't examine him, but I had faith in this man. The way he spoke about literature in general, about my books, the way he spoke about certain sentences, and his Hebrew was imperfect, far from being perfect. I was so impressed, I said, have a try. To be on the safe side, I sent his try to no other than Sir Isaiah Berlin, who had some remote knowledge of Russian, as some of you may know. And Isaiah sent me back a postcard with a kind of a with a nod. That was it.
Very good. So it's a combination of faith and then backing up the faith with... yeah, that's a good recipe. That works. So what do you consider a good translation of your work?
A good translation of my work is a translation which evokes in a reader from a totally different civilization and background, totally different sometimes, planets away, evokes a certain sense of proximity, as if the reader is invited into the character's living room and kitchen and garden and nursery and even inside the bedroom. If a Chinese reader says to me in simple English, in Beijing, I haven't even told you this, Long, my friend, person approached me in Renmin University more than a year ago, a student, and said, you know, I read my Michael. I read A Tale of Love and Darkness. Yes, we know something about families with an only child. You hit the nail on the head, she said in so many words. That was the moment when I was finally convinced that Jung is a great translator.
Okay, so they've pierced through something. That's wonderful. And do you feel like a translated work is still wholly your work, or does it feel like something collaborative or shared, or how does that you know, My Michael in Swedish on your shelf, does it feel still wholly your book?
Well, you know, it's like I suppose it's like a painter who happens to enter a totally unfamiliar living room in a foreign country, and something of a reproduction of his own work is hanging on the wall in the living room. Yes, it does one or two moving feelings combined with a certain awe. I will never be able to read it, although it's my own, my flesh and blood, and I will never be able to read it.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Can you imagine one of your own children one morning turning to you, starting talking to you in Sanskrit?
Right. Great analogy. Yep, that would be very strange. I am going to invite now our 6 guest translators. Come on up here to the stage, please. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Go. Yes, please. 3 here. 3 over here. Right here. Okay. Good. There's space for everyone. We're all settled in. So I'm going to do some introductions here. To my immediate right is Victor Radutsky, about whom Amos just spoke. He's a local. He lives here in Jerusalem. And in addition to all the other things you've heard about him, he and his magnificent translation work, he teaches Jewish texts at Midreshet Yerushalayim, right? And how many of Amos's books have you translated? 12. Okay. To Victor's right is Mahir Unshal Erish. He studied Ottoman history and archaeology and language and works as a writer and translator, and his first novel is being translated now into English and will probably be called The Size of the World. He told me the 2 options, and I chose this one. To Mahir's right is our Albanian translator, Alina Karauli. She's a translator for the EU delegation in Albania. And this is her first work of Hebrew writer. She's starting right at the top. And there are no Hebrew to Albanian translators. So, and this happens fairly often. I mean, when you have 46 languages, there aren't always Hebrew to translators. So Alina is using Nicolas Delange's English translation, and Elena, whom you'll meet in a second, her Italian translation, because Alina knows Italian as well. So she's using those 2 translations as she works on her translation into Albanian. And as Nili Oz said, by the end of this week, you'll have so much Hebrew, you'll be the first Hebrew to Albanian translator. So we're banking on you, Alina. To Amos's left is Chong Ju Tien. I practiced that, I'm sorry. She is a scholar. She finished her PhD here in Jerusalem, and she's the director of the Department of Oriental Literary Studies in the Institute of Foreign Literature at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in Beijing. And she has also done quite a number, something like Victor's number of translations of Amos's work, and mostly Amos. A few other writers, but you have focused on Amos, right? To Chong's left is our Dutch translator, Hilde Pach. She's both a translator and a journalist, and I just want to tell you that she wrote her doctorate on the world's oldest Yiddish newspaper, which was in Amsterdam. And she'll be happy to tell you about it after this evening if you want. And I believe it's coming out as a book as well. So, or is out. And to Hilda's left is our Italian translator, Elena Löwenthal. She's not only a renowned translator of Hebrew to Italian, but she also hasn't been here with us all week. She's only here this evening because she is the cultural attaché for the Italian embassy in Israel. So she's quite busy, and we're very happy that you could be here, sort of wearing two hats this evening as well. And you have also been translating, you've translated many of Amos's books, I know that. Yeah, go ahead.
I hope to translate many others.
Oh, yes.
You should know that 9 out of 10 books, Elena's translation is always the first one to appear outside Israel. So much so that it is very current in Italy, the rumor that Elena translates an Amos Oz novel even before he wrote it.
We also learned this week that in Holland, there's always pressure on Hilde and other translators of Hebrew to Dutch to come out with the translation before the English gets to the market, so that the Dutch public will read it in Dutch and not in English. So that's a lot of pressure. So before we talk with the translators, I want you to see their texts a little bit. Oh yeah, I'm doing this. I want you to just look at their texts a little bit. Above you, you'll see them. If I do this right. Okay. So we have the Hebrew text. We have the English text. Guess which one this was? And this is the Dutch text. We have the Turkish text. Well, it's going by itself. The Russian text, and no, it's not. The Albanian text, and the Italian text. Okay. Stop. Okay. Right. So I wanted you to see them. Of course, just seeing them, just the visuals of it. It's so interesting, isn't it, to see that, you know, your own words could turn out in so many different ways. And one thing that we translators are always conscious of is word count. And Amos told me that of the 46 languages he's translated into, there has never been a translation that comes out fewer words than Hebrew. Tell us why you think Hebrew is such a compact language.
Well, I have a theory, but please take it with a grain of salt. When the ancient Hebrews started putting words down, there was no parch, no paper. They chiseled their words in stone. You have to be very economical when you write this way.
I like that theory. Yes. But I thought it might be of interest to you to know that the text that you were looking at were the first 2 paragraphs of the book, which we're going to read to you in just a minute. And just for comparative sake, in Hebrew, the word count was 124, okay? The English and the Dutch and the Albanian all went up about 35%. So it's another third the number of words. The Italian translation went up 63%. Did you notice her answer was without words? The Russian translation went up only 6%, but that's because, as Victor's been telling us all week, Russian and Hebrew are the same language. The Chinese, when I first counted it, it came out to 241 characters, which meant it was double. It was twice as long. And Chong said, that can't be. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Then it turned out I was counting characters, and several characters sometimes make up a word, like the word for Jerusalem is 4 characters long. So it turns out that it's almost identical in length, the number of words between Hebrew and Chinese. But the biggest miracle of all is the Turkish. It went down by 8%. So we're a little concerned about what happened to those other words in Turkish, but we're looking for them. Galia, Shaul, we need you to set the tone. Again, a second song, and then some conversation with our translators.
Thank you for inviting us to your party. So this is another song from the same project.
על הגג צילה צל איתי, צל שהולך ועוזב אותי, בבית לא טוב, בחוץ חשוך, החדר בלילה יותר נמוך, הים לקח, הים נתן, צללי דקה וצל קטן, צל מתנצל, פונה בורח, הים נתן, הים לוקח. ידה קלה
על המיטה צל איתי,
על גב ידה ידי צפודה,
על הצילה צל איתי,
היא לבדי, אני לבדה, וזה במרפסת בעמידה. הים לקח, הים נתן, צללי דקה וצל קטן, צל מתנצל, פונה בורח, הים נתן, הים לוקח, הים לקח, הים נתן, צללי דקה וצל קטן, צל מתנצל, פונה בורח, הים נתן, הים לוקח.
Thank you, Shaul and Galia. So, we're going to read 2 paragraphs. We're going to start with Amos in the original.
זו הפתיחה של הספר, שתי הפסקאות הראשונות. הנה כאן סיפור מימי החורף של סוף שנת 59 ותחילת שנת 60. יש בסיפור הזה שגיאה וחשק, יש אהבה נכזבת, ויש איזה עניין דתי שנשאר כאן בלי מענה. בכמה מן הבניינים עדיין ניכרים סימני המלחמה שחצתה את העיר לפני 10 שנים. ברקע תוכלו לשמוע נגינת אקורדיון רחוקה, או צלילי כלות הנפש של מפוחית פה לפנות ערב מאחורי תריס מוגף. בהרבה דירות בירושלים אפשר למצוא על קיר הסלון את מערבולות הכוכבים של ואן גוך, או את רתיחת הברושים שלו, ומחצלות קש עדיין פרוסות בחדרים הקטנים, וימי ציקלג, או דוקטור ז'יוואגו, מונח הפוך ופתוח על ספת מזרון ספוגי, המכוסה בפיסת בד בטעם מזרחי, עם תלולית של כריות רקומות. כל הערב דולק תנור נפט בלהבה כחולה. מתוך תרמיל של פגז צומח בפינת החדר מין כליל קוצים מסוגנן.
Here is a story from the winter days of the end of 1959 and the beginning of 1960. It is a story of error and desire, of unrequited love, and of a religious question that remains unresolved. Some of the buildings still bore the marks of the war that had divided the city a decade earlier. In the background, you could hear the distant strains of an accordion or the plaintive sound of a harmonica from behind closed shutters. In many flats in Jerusalem, you might find Van Gogh's starry whirlpool skies or his shimmering cypresses on the living room wall, rush mats on the floors of the small rooms, and Dr. Zhivago or Yizhar's Days of Tziklag lying open, face down on a foam sofa bed that was covered with a length of Middle Eastern cloth and piled with embroidered cushions. A paraffin heater burned all evening long with a blue flame. In a corner of the room, a tasteful bunch of thorn twigs sprouted from a mortar shell casing.
Вот рассказ из дней зимы конца 1959 года, начало года 60-го. Есть в этом рассказе заблуждение и желание, есть безответная любовь, и есть еще некий религиозный вопрос, оставшийся здесь без ответа. На некоторых домах до сих пор заметны следы войны, разделившей город 10 лет тому назад. Откуда-то из-за опущенных жалюзей доносится приглушенная мелодия аккордеона или рвущий душу сумеречный напев губной гармоники. Во многих иерусалимских квартирах можно найти на стене гостиной водовороты звезд Ван Гога или кипение его кипарисов, а в спальнях пол все еще укрывает соломенные циновки. Дни Циклага или доктор Живаго лежат распахнутые вверх обложкой на тахте с поролоновым матрасом, прикрытой тканью в восточном вкусе, рядом с горкой вышитых подушек. Весь вечер горит голубое пламя керосинового обогревателя. Из снарядной гильзы в углу комнаты торчит стилизованный букетик из колючек.
Thank you, Victor. Mahir in Turkish.
Bu sesimini alıyor musunuz? Bu 1959'un sonu 1960'ın başındaki kış günlerinden bir hikaye. Hata ve arzunun, karşılıksız aşkın ve çözülemeden kalmış bir dini meselenin hikayesi. Bir 10 yıl kadar önce şehri ikiye bölen savaşın izlerini hala taşırdı binaların bazıları. Arka planda bir akordiyonun uzak namelerini, bir mızıkanın yürek burkan sesini duyabilirdiniz. Kudüs'teki birçok dairenin oturma odası duvarlarında Van Gogh'un yıldızlı girdap gökleri ya da titreşen selvilerini, küçük odaların zeminlerinde hazırdan paspasları, doğu işi uzun örtüler serilip üzerine dantelli minderlerle bezenmiş sünger çekyatlar üzerinde açık halde Doktor Zhivago ya da Yisar'ın Ziklak günlerini görebilirdiniz. Bir gaz sobası tüm akşam mavi aleviyle yanar dururdu. Odanın bir köşesinde hoş bir zevki yansıtırcasına içinden bir demet diken dalı fışkıran mermi kovanları dururdu.
And Alina in Albanian.
Kjo është një histori e ditëve të dimrit të fund vitit 1959 dhe fillimit të 1960-s. Është një histori gabimi e dëshire, dashurie të pashpërblyer dhe një çështje fetare që mbetet e pazgjidhur. Disa nga ndërtesat mbanin ende shenjat e luftës që kishte ndarë qytetin një dekadë më parë. Në sfond, prapa grilave të mbyllura, mund të dëgjoje vajtimin e largët të një fizarmonike apo tingullin e përvajshëm të një harmonike. Në shumë apartamente në Jeruzalem mund të gjeje gjiratoren e qijeve yjor të Van Goghut apo qiparisat e tij vezullues në murin e dhomës së ndenjes, hastra mbi dyshemet e dhomave të vogla dhe doktor Zhivagon apo ditët e Ziklagut të Idzarit lën hapur përmbys mbi një divan të mbuluar me një copë të gjatë nga lindja e mesme, mbushur me nënkresa të qëndisura. Një ngros me parafin digjej gjithë mbrëmjen me një flak blu. Në një cep të dhomës, një tuf e hish me gjembaçësh sumbullonte nga një kuti predhash.
Thank you, Alina. Zhong in Chinese, please.
这是发生在1959年末与1960年初冬的故事。故事之中有错误与欲望，有求之不得的爱，还有不得其解的宗教故事。在一些建筑物上，还残留着10年前将城市一分为二的战争痕迹。在背景中，你可听见远处传来手风琴音，或是从紧闭的百叶窗后传来口琴的哀声。在耶路撒冷的许多小房子里，你可以发现起居室墙壁上挂着梵高画的星空或者百丝树，小房间的地板上铺着苇席，打开的日瓦格医生或者喜格拉的日子倒放在铺着中东布单、摆有一排绣垫的泡沫沙发上，煤油加热器整晚冒着蓝色的火苗，在房间一角，一束雅致的菊枝在炮弹壳中吐露着嫩芽。
Thank you, John. Now Hilda in Dutch.
Dit is een verhaal dat zich afspeelt in de winterdagen van 1959 en het begin van 1960. Dit verhaal bevat vergissing en begeerte, teleurgestelde liefde en een religieuze kwestie die hier onbeslist blijft. Bij een aantal huizen zijn nog steeds tekenen zichtbaar van de oorlog die de stad 10 jaar geleden heeft verdeeld. Tegen de achtergrond kun je een verre accordeonmelodie horen of de smachtende geluiden van een mondharmonica in de avondschemering achter een gesloten luik. In veel woningen in Jeruzalem zijn aan de wand in de woonkamer de wervelingen van de Sterrennacht van Van Gogh te vinden of zijn korenveld met cipressen. En in de kleine kamers liggen nog rieten matten op de grond. En de dagen van Ziklag of Dr. Zhivago liggen ondersteboven opengeslagen op een bank die bestaat uit een schuimrubberen matras met een Oriëntaalse doek eroverheen en een stapeltje geborduurde kussens erop. De hele avond brandt er een petroleumkachel met een blauwe vlam. Uit een granaathuls groeit een kunstig gevormde krans van distels.
Thank you, Hilde. And Elena in Italian.
You know it's the longest one. Questa è una storia che si svolge nell'inverno tra la fine del 1959 e l'inizio del 1960. Questa storia comprende un errore e della passione, un amore deluso e una questione di ordine religioso che qui rimane irrisolta. Non pochi edifici portavano ancora ben riconoscibili i segni della guerra che 10 anni prima aveva diviso la città. In sottofondo vi capiterà di udire la melodia lontana di una fisarmonica o le struggenti note di un'ocarina sul far della sera dietro un'imposta chiusa. In molte case di Gerusalemme, sul muro del salotto, era appesa una riproduzione della Notte stellata o del campo di grano con cipressi di Van Gogh. Nelle stanze più piccole per terra c'era una stuoia di paglia, il tomo dei giorni di Ziklag o del dottor Zivago, capovolto e aperto sul divano, con il materasso spugnoso coperto da una striscia di stoffa orientaleggiante e una catasta di cuscini ricamati. Per tutta la sera nella stufa a petrolio restava accesa una fiammella celeste e non mancava di certo il bossolo di cannone trasformato in vaso ornamentale che tutti avevano in quel periodo in un angolo della stanza, con un fascio di rami secchi decorativi.
I don't know about the rest of you, but I was partly in Jerusalem and partly hovering over all those different countries whose languages we were just listening to. It was a lovely tour of the world in a way. So any of you who would like to answer this, what are sort of the unique aspects of the difficulties of translating this particular book? What did you come up against working on Judas? Elena, please.
Translating Amos is always something that has deeply to do with yourself, and this is the beauty of all his books, and this is the privilege of his translator. This is our privilege to cope with those kind of books that come and call yourself. But for me, as Italian translation, Judas has something even more, which is the heart of the story. I suppose all of us know the title of a book, which is Rome and Jerusalem. And all this story about loyalty, treason, faithfulness, and its contrary, is the story. It's a 2,000-year story that called me in an even deeper sense than usually with his books, because Judas is Judaism, but is also the beginning of Christianity, and I'm translating in the language of Christianity. So it was an even deeper experience for me. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's in a case where it connects so deeply that an Italian translator is going to have a lot of involvement in. What happens in a place like China, where the Judas story? How well known is the Judas story in China, the Chinese reader?
I think Judas story is a little bit new to many Chinese common readers. That is why at the very beginning I did feel difficult translating this book. But Amos Oz is a very unique writer. As she said just now, sometimes you can read yourself through the book.
Mm-hmm.
It's a special experience of translating.
Very nice. We have, translators sometimes we come up against the same problems, and sometimes we come up with unique problems. And I think one of the most interesting things for us this week has been what's unique in some of the different languages. So, Alina, I'm thinking of what we encountered when you explained to us something in the Albanian language about the word Jew and what to do about that. Can you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, the problem is that the Albanian word for Jew is Çifut, as you know, and but the origin is from Turkish language, and it has a negative meaning that we came to know later on.
Also in Turkish.
Also in Turkish, but there is no other word to replace this one. So what I see, many translators would replace with Hebrew, which is not the same word. But we don't have a choice. So I have to play with this
And Alina explained to us that Jews in Albania would find this offensive.
Yeah,
you know,
I
so
had this problem before with another text, and some of them said to me, why did you use this word? I said, that's the word, that's the vocabulary says. There is no other word for this. And they said, yeah, but it's a pejorative term. It comes from Turkish, and we have to stop using this word. Okay, but what's the solution? Sorry?
What does the Jewish community in Albania use? If
Hebrew.
as in,
So I don't know, it seems a little bit illogical, but
and then in Turkish, you have that word as well.
Yes. In pejorative meaning, yes. But in Turkish, we use the word Yahudi. It's the same.
So there's another word that you can use in Turkish.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Which they don't have in Albanian.
we have it, but it's very, very old.
It's
Makes no sense to use it.
Okay, so it has to be something also that will resonate with the readers. And speaking of resonating, you know, you're trying to describe a scene, and so those two first paragraphs you were seeing take place in a Jerusalem living room in 1959. What's that going to look like in a Chinese mind, in a Dutch mind, in a Turkish mind? And Alina asked a question about what was this business about a mortar shell, a bomb casing, holding a bunch of thorns. Why would that be in a living room? So first of all, Amos, what did you explain?
Well, mortar shells were everywhere in Jerusalem, and they were shiny and made of bronze, and they were very intimate object because it was shortly after the war, and they were much less expensive than buying a proper flower vase, and most people were poor. Now, thistles or thorns, they were very trendy. In some ways, I find why, because they had flowers, they had colors, and they were regarded by absolutely everyone in Jerusalem as very unique and original.
Now, that resonated in an unusual way with Alina. And what did you tell us about vases after the war in Albania?
Not after the war.
Oh, not after the war.
During the communist period, we used to, some of us that had the chance to travel abroad, and if you happen to have a bottle of a can of Coca-Cola, you would drink that and then keep the can or the bottle as a special object that you could admire.
And that became the vase to put the...
Just like a vase, you would put it in a place that you could look at it and admire.
Right. So here was the resonance of taking this scene from Jerusalem, and then it translates to Albania. Yes, Elena?
What I wanted to add, if I can, is that also for Italian taste, it was a little bit strange, this kind of keeping flowers at home. And another thing that is quite strange for Italian readers sometimes, that they are reading a book with a story which takes place in Jerusalem, which means Middle East, which means hot, sun, and Middle East. And in most of these stories, in this story, it's raining, it's very cold, and it seems a little bit like Pianura Padana, which means the most not so nice weather in Italy, and that surprised a lot our readers. Yes.
Victor, can you take the microphone? So Victor has been telling us all week that Russian and Hebrew are basically the same. Could you elaborate on that in just a sentence or two?
Yes, I will try. As you know, Hebrew and Russian is very similar languages. Not, I speak about the mental point of view. So my work is difficult from one side, And from the other side, very simple. I took a huge block of Russian language, and I took a hammer, and I chipping the pieces, and throw it away. What is I don't need it, and what is remain. This is the translation. But it is not so simple, as I tell you. For example, when we published Judas, Russian editor tell me it must be Judas, but in Russian pronunciation, Yehuda. Yehuda is a traitor. In every language, Amos explain us very clear, it's a traitor. So it's Yehuda. But in Russia, now there is a new law, a punishment for every person who abused the feeling of believers, especially Christian believers. So they were so afraid, they liked this book, and they sent a letter with congratulations to the author. But I find a way how to prevent this obligation of abusing. I make a footnote here, and I marked, this is from Matthew, this is from Lucas, it is Yeshayahu, it is from Mishlei. So it's full of, but I must know Jerusalem is a really holy city. They like Jerusalem so much that I asked me to make an addition to the book. And they wrote about 20 neighborhoods what Amos mentioned in this book, 20 here. And they publish it in addition to the books. And they say it's so interesting, so interesting. So I do my job in a proper way. With hammer, with make an effort, and this is a book.
And you get more for your dollar or your ruble from any other translation. You got all those extra sections to it too. It's amazing. Mahir, in terms of Turkish, you had to correct a few things where Amos wrote in one place a war between Greece and Turkey. You said, no, it has to be the Ottoman Empire. And there were some little changes that you need to make. And I'm just out of curiosity, is the Turkish public interested in reading about Israel, about things that happen here?
Things are changing. People may know more writers than the earlier times from Israel. For example, Amos Oz, Appelfeld, Keret, Eshkol Nevo. But something wrong about that. All the books are translated from mostly English. I'm going to stop it.
Oh, all right. You heard it here first. That's great. And Hilda, we know the opposite. I mean, the Dutch public is one of the biggest reading publics of Israeli literature. Can you try to explain that for us, please?
I don't know. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, the Dutch, Holland is for many. Well, Holland is a Protestant country, where also live very many Roman Catholics, but the culture is mostly Protestant. And the Protestants have always been very interested in the Jews and also in the coming about of Israel, and not always to the pleasure of the Jews themselves. But so there's a lot of interest in Israel in Holland and also in Israeli literature. And there's also a lot of criticism about on the on the Israeli politics. And as many writers like Amos are saying things that are appreciated in Holland, that maybe, although it has nothing to do with their literary work, but I think that also contributes to the success of the book, of the books. But to begin with, the literature, the books written have to be written well, and if that's not the case, they won't be such a great success, I think.
That's great. It's good to know that the Dutch reading public is a discerning one. I'm going to invite now Dan Volman to come and join us on stage. Dan is a veteran of an award-winning Israeli filmmaker whose work's been celebrated at the top international festivals and in Israel as well. Many of his films are classics like Lemon Popsicle and Geoni and Foreign Sister and My Michael, made, yes please, that's your seat, and which is of course an adaptation of Amos's novel. And his newest film, An Israeli Love Story, is in cinemas now, and he's feverishly working on another film. He was up all night last night. And but what I want to ask you about, of course, is there are rumors that you may make a film of Judas. And can you tell us just a little bit about the process? How does that work?
I really expressed interest in optioning the novel and trying to raise money and, of course, write a screenplay and raise money to make a film. You know, obviously, I'm, a friend of Amos. I love his writing. I think he's a great writer. And there was something about this novel. You know, again, Jerusalem is very important for me, and I'm a Jerusalemite originally, and many of my films deal with Jerusalem. And there's something about this novel that attracted me. I know you might think it's because it's a low-budget film, but it's not that. I think that I think there's a big challenge for the writer. To have a book which deals with ideas and a lot of information, and the story is not a big size. It's not an action film. And so I think the question is what kind of a mixture as a writer. You know, he uses of information and make people, keep people's interest. And so I'm saying, I think for us filmmakers, because we translate to a different media, it's much more difficult because you cannot have these long passages of information. And so it has to be, it's a big challenge how to make it work. I don't know if I answered your question, but I said something.
You said something, yeah. Today in our session, Dan has been taking part in some of our sessions together. And today when we were talking about those first two paragraphs, at one point Amos said, well, while we were arguing over exactly what Shmuel looks like and how he puts talcum powder on himself, he looked across the table and said to Dan, well, this is easy for you. This is the easy part. But then we got to a descriptive adjective, socialist. And he looked again across the table and said, I don't know how you're going to deal with that one. And so, but very interesting for us, we have only our words for translation. You have only your camera and the visuals, and sometimes you really kind of need both. But we wish you luck in making this film. And one more question about the film, how much will you work together on this? How much authorial involvement is there?
If it works out, and I do succeed negotiating with the agent, and then obviously, like with My Michael, I think a lot of ideas in the film came from Amos. And even in the editing and at the end of the film, there were many very, very good suggestions, which, you know, are really in the film. So obviously, it will be a collaborative effort. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Obviously, there's so much more to talk about. I can see it on your faces. You want more, but we're going to let you go home as well. But we wanted to end the evening. I want to say a few thank yous and also bring our wonderful musicians back to serenade you for the end of the evening. I have to say personally that, as Moti mentioned in the beginning, this is the second time we're doing this, the translation residency, and it's an incredible experience, as you can already see. You can see it's just amazing sitting day after day and talking about a book we all love and respect, with the author sitting there, working word by word sometimes. It's a remarkable process, but it's only possible because of the partners we have here. And Moti Schwartz, the director, Paulina Stemmler, Orly Abulaf, the people I've been working with, you know, for months getting this together, and the rest of the team I'm not going to name now because I'll forget somebody, but really my appreciation, I can't tell you how wonderful it is to work with this group of people in this place. Thank you for that.
עכשיו אני אימא נדיה. קצת לפני מותי ציפור על ענף פיתתה אותי. מה יהיה כשאמות? צליל או ריח או לא? הייתי נדיה ועכשיו לא רוח, לא גלגול, לא רפאית. כעת אני נדיה, נשימות השינה של בני על מצע הקש. אני רפרוף וילון שהים מרעיד בחלון. זאת אני, נדיה, אני ישנים.
אל תהי לא רכה, זה טורף, פוצע מוצץ ויונק, תצעקי לו ואל תתני, קר ורע זה גוהר עלייך, קורע דורס, תצעקי, אל תתני לו, אמא אל תתני, הילחמי בו אמי המחורסמת, תחנקי את קרונו, ולא, לא, אל תתני לו אמא, נשכי סרטי כנועה שכמותך, אל תתני, קר ורע זה גוהר עלייך, מתיר ופורם את אורך החיוור את שדייך.
ירח בלילה, ירח ביום, מכאיב כל חלקה ילדי אבשלום, בני אבשלום. השולחן כאן, המיטה כאן, הגיטרה כאן ואתה בחלום. ירח בלילה, ירח ביום, זורח בים, חיוור בחלום. טורף כל חלקה חיה, בני, בני גם אתה. זאת אני, אמא נדיה. כעת אני נשימות השינה של בני על מצע הקש. אני גם תנומת בעלי שצנח לישון על ספת הסלון. אני חלום קלתי שמצחה על דלפק המלון. אני רפרוף וילון שהיה מרעיד בחלון. זאת אני, נדיה. אני ישנים.
אל תהי לא רכה, זה טורף, בוצע יונק ומוצץ, תצעקי לו ואל תתני, קר ורע זה גוהר עלייך, קורע דורס, תצעקי, אל תתני לו, אמא אל תתני, הילחמי בו אמי המחורסמת, תחנקי את קרונו, ולא, לא, אל תתני לו אמא, נשכי סרטי כנועה שכמותך, אל תתני, קר ורע זה גוהר עלייך, אל תתני לו אמא, נשכי סרטי כנועה שכמותך, אל תתני, קר ורע זה גוהר עלייך, מתיר ופורם את אורך החיוור. עיניים, 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 במים עיניים, בענף עיניים, בווילון עיניים, עיניים בכד, עיניים בקר. נדיה זוכרת, נדיה ילדה, בסמלת אורגנדין או חצאית כתיפה, סרטים כלואים בצמות כלואות, תשבינה זקופה ותפסיקי לפזול. עיניים, עיניים בלילה, עיניים, עיניים בגב, בשדיים עיניים. נדיה זוכרת סודות ישנים, מתנשפים על חיטים כמו צמאים. עיניים, עיניים, ונדיה זוכרת סנאים בין ענפי הגן העזוב, בשדה המחשיך כל פעמון צובט לפנות ערב.
רצתה לנוס אל עולם הסנאים, להיות לעד לא אישה ולא איש, עם קיבל חיים קטן שרובו רק עיניים, עיניים, עין הרע, איך בצניעות לעורר אהבה.
עיניים, עיניים, עיניים במים, עיניים בלילה, עיניים בגב. נדיה זוכרת סודות ישנים. בת 10.5, אביה ירום עד מותניו, מחליף שורת רעפים על הגג, והיא מתחתיו על הסולם מגישה לידו רעף רעף, שואפת את זעתו, זוכרת פרקוס פתאום בעומק בטנה, אביה משכיב רעף רעף, ושריריו עיניים עיניים נוברים בין עצמות כתפיו. עיניים, עיניים, עיניים בגב, עיניים בגג, עיניים בחג. נדיה זוכרת תחרת ממחטות, חגורת בריות, מזימות וסודות של נשים חסודות, צחוקים חנוקים, דודות קורצות, אט אט פורסות עליה קורי מסדר הכבישות, תחבולות, סגולות, תכסיסים עתיקים. עיניים, עיניים, עין הרע, הלכות צניעות, הלכות נידה, הלכות זהירות, תום ועורמה. עיניים, עיניים, עין הרע, תלמדי איך בצניעות לעורר אהבה. קטורת, סחרחורת, בחילה היא קסמות, רצתה לברוח, רצתה למות. עיניים, עיניים, עין הרע, נדיה זוכרת, הלכות צניעות, הלכות נידה, הלכות זהירות, טוב ועורמה.
רצתה לנוס אל עולם הסנאים, להיות לעד לא אישה ולא איש, עם קיבל חיים קטן שרובו רק עיניים, עיניים, עין הרע, איך בצניעות לעורר אהבה. לנוס אל עולם הסנאים, להיות לעד לא אישה ולא איש, עם קיבל חיים קטן שרובו רק עיניים, עיניים, עין הרע, איך בצניעות לעורר אהבה.
Galia Chai, Shaul Besser, תודה רבה. Thank you very much. Our translators tonight, thank you. Alina, Mahir, Victor, Chong, Hilde, and Elena, thank you so much. Our guest, Dan Volman, thank you. And biggest thanks, Amos, תודה רבה רבה. Neely, thank you for being with us all week.